Hi there. In this video, I want to talk about some really important rules of mens rea. And as you can see, I've got an impatient little guest visitor, my dog Lady. So some of these rules are really important because if you come across a criminal law scenario, which you will in your exam, it may be that you see some of these rules happening in front of you. You need to be able to identify them and you need to be able to talk about the outcome for your client, the defendant. So, as a reminder, most crimes need an actus reus, a guilty action, and mens rea, which means guilty mind. And those two things have to happen together at the same time. Now, there is a slight exception, which are called strict liability crimes, and there is a separate explainer video to watch for those. But majority of crimes need actus reus and mens rea together. So, for example, if you get mad at someone and think, oh, I could kill them, that's of course not murder. You may have the guilty mind, if you're serious of course, but you haven't committed any guilty actions yet. Similarly, if you do something by accident, you may have done a guilty act, but you don't normally have the mens rea. So therefore, again, you won't be prosecuted. To be prosecuted, you need to have the two together. However, there have been a number of cases which have presented a conundrum for the courts, where they've had to try and decide if we have actus reus and mens rea together. The first is something called transferred malice. This is where the defendant aims a crime at a particular victim, but they miss and commit a crime against somebody else. Now you can see my little sort of diagram here. Let's imagine you want to shoot somebody. You aim your gun at the victim, your intended victim, but you're not a very good shot. You miss and you hit someone behind them, killing them. Now, we have the actus reus because you've committed the unlawful killing of a human being under the Queen's peace. But do you have the mens rea for that killing? Because of course you didn't mean to kill that person, you meant to kill somebody else. The courts have come up with quite a straightforward solution to this. We simply transfer the mens rea or the malice to the actual victim. This works, of course, because if you think of the definition of murder, for example, it's the unlawful killing of a human being under the Queen's peace with malice aforethought. The definition doesn't say it's the killing of your victim, your target. So if you kill a human being, that's the actus reus. Now, did you intend to kill or cause serious harm? Of course. And again, the definition doesn't say intend to kill or cause serious harm to your intended target. The law simply says that you intended to kill or cause serious harm to another. So we simply transfer that intention to the actual victim to find them guilty. Key case examples where we can see this mechanism. First is R versus Latimer. Two men were in an argument. The defendant whipped his belt out to the man he was fighting with. That man ducked and it hit an innocent bystander, a woman, in the face with the belt buckle. Ouch. Now the question was, could we find Latimer guilty of battery against the woman? And the court said yes, the actus reus is to apply unlawful force to another, which he'd clearly done. And again, it doesn't say to the intended victim. And did he intend to apply unlawful force to another? Yes, we transfer that intention from the man he was fighting with to the woman he actually hit. Again, it doesn't say you have to intend to apply force to your target. It's did you apply force to another and did you intend? Now, bear in mind, it has to be the same sort of crime. It failed in R versus Pemberton. Now, in this case, the defendant threw a stone at their intended victim. They intended battery to apply unlawful force to another. However, they missed and instead the stone went through a window, smashing it. That's criminal damage. So we have an actus reus, we have caused unlawful damage to someone else's property, but can we transfer the mens rea? No, because it's a different crime. He didn't intend to damage property. He intended to apply unlawful force on a person. So if you throw a stone at one person's car window, but you miss and smash another, the principle would work. Because you intended criminal damage against one target, you committed criminal damage against a different target, we simply transfer the mens rea. But it has to be with the same sort of crime. It doesn't mix different offences. The other main rule just to be aware of is the contemporaneity rule. That's a bit of a mouthful. Now, contemporaneous just means at the same time. You might also see it as the coincidence rule. And coincidence just means having the actus reus and the mens rea at the same time. We've got 3 cases which presented problems when it came to having actus reus and mens rea at the same time. So in Fagan versus the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, the defendant, Fagan, accidentally parked on a police officer's foot when the police officer pulled him over. That again would be the offence of battery, applying unlawful force to another. However, he didn't do this on purpose. Now the policeman started shouting, "Ouch, ouch, get off," and the defendant swore at him, laughed, and left his car there before eventually driving off. Now he was charged not just with battery but assaulting a police officer, which is a more serious offence. And he argued that he couldn't be guilty because when he parked on the officer's foot, he had the actus reus, but no mens rea. The mens rea came later. He said, when I started the crime, I didn't have coincidence of actus reus and mens rea. And the court simply got around this by saying, as long as you have the two together at any point during the crime, you can be guilty. And he had the two together at the point he realised and left the car there. Now, if he realised and went, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," and then drove off, that wouldn't be a crime. It would simply be an accident. We would have a guilty action, but we wouldn't have any sort of mens rea. So he was found guilty. Another case, one of my favourites, is Thabo-Meli versus R. Now, in this case, the defendant beat up the victim, meaning to kill him. So at this point, he had the mens rea very clearly for murder. However, the victim didn't actually die, so we didn't have the actus reus of murder. To dispose of the body, which remember at this point was just an unconscious person, he wasn't actually dead, the defendant threw the victim off a cliff. The victim eventually actually died anyway from exposure, lack of food, water and medical treatment. However, the defendant argued he shouldn't be guilty of murder here because he didn't have the mens rea. He didn't intend to kill the victim by throwing him off the cliff because he thought he was already dead. It's such a clever argument. However, this man clearly deserves to be guilty, so the judges manipulated the rules and said that this is all one continuing action. It's all one continuing transaction. And as long as we have the actus reus and mens rea, at some point in that transaction, you can be guilty of a crime. And clearly we have actus reus and mens rea during the overall timeline, so he was found guilty too. In a similar case, R versus Church, a man knocked out a woman, and he meant to. However, he didn't realise she was unconscious. He thought he'd killed her. He tried to revive her for about 30 minutes or so, panicked, and then threw her body in the river. Now remember, a bit like Thabo-Meli, she wasn't actually dead at this point. The cause of death was shown to be drowning. So actually, the actus reus of the death came when she was thrown into the river. The defendant argued he shouldn't be guilty because when he threw her in the river, he didn't have the actus reus for any sort of murder or manslaughter. Now again, we couldn't let this sort of behaviour slide. So the court said, It was one long continuing act, a continuing transaction, and therefore he was guilty of manslaughter. So as you can see, these kind of things could easily come up in an exam style scenario where the defendant has a target but misses and hurts or damages something else. Or we have a person who tries to kill, thinks the person's dead but they're actually not, but they die later on. Be aware of these mechanisms and how a defendant can still be found justly guilty of a crime because they have them together at the same point, at the same time, in one form or another. Thanks for watching. Bye from me and bye from Lady.